Welcome back to another episode of One on One. I'm your host, Hannah Balkowski, and in this episode, we will be talking to LaSalle University alumnus Neal Tyler, who graduated in 2004 from the Communication Department. Since his time at LaSalle, Neal has been a successful filmmaker and photographer. Producing, directing, camera operating, and writing, he's done it all. Neal, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Hannah.
So you work on lots of different films and move from project to project, but can you tell us a little bit about your life as a filmmaker or a typical day in your life?
So my day-to-day changes depending on the job that I'm in, and then A, the project, and then also B, my involvement with it. So I might be DP or camera op, or I might be field producing. I might be story producing, which would just be in post-production, just kind of honing the nuts and bolts of how the story will play out there once the editors take hold. So my week to week really changes. I was never really one that glommed to an office job. So I can do it for short spurts like editing or writing, something like that in development. But that's why I love what I do, is because I can go into post-production for a couple months and then come out and then just travel the world or travel the country and get all new experiences out there in the field. So that's one thing that I love the most about it. Seeing things I'd never in a million years would otherwise be seeing, and meeting people along the way too that have changed my life, certainly. And I hope that in some way I might have affected them or changed their life, but no other way that would have happened except for filmmaking or TV making, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Just being able to move around and do different things. You're always on your feet, kind of.
Yeah.
Always changing. So then you're never bored, I guess.
No, exactly. So, and then, it's a difficult balance of trying to stay in the moment, but also looking down the line at what the next job is going to be, always developing something else. So be that personal project or just the bread and butter of paying the bills.
Right. So you have done all these different roles in the film. Which role is your favorite or the one that you gravitate towards?
So because I do hold many different positions, DP, director, producer, I write as well. I've gone to like Austin Film Festival to try to promote my screenplays that I place there. In the end, I think it's just all storytelling to me, just different avenues for storytelling. Even if you're just, a photographer as well, if you're just holding a camera, taking stills, you want that still to be able to impart an emotion, and that's through storytelling. So for me, I got into it to be a director, was always what most attracted me, and it's still my main pursuit. But everything else, it's like cross training, I think. So when I do a DP role or produce or edit or whatever else, that still hones my skills and abilities as a director.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of directing, you have a film coming out called Driftwood, and you wrote the screenplay and directed it. What's the main difference or the main differences between directing and producing a film?
I'd say the main difference between producing and directing is that for any kind of art form, I think that it has to be a mix of organization and creativity. So you can't really be creative unless you're organized. One example that I always give is that a painter needs a clean workstation. You have to stretch the canvas a certain way. You need your brushes certainly aligned. So that's typically the job of the producer, is laying out all the details, all the logistics, and just, getting everything set up so that everybody else there, the director included, can be creative and can collaborate to create the best possible project. Whereas the director can just, create what it needs to become, just through creativity there.
Yeah, director's kind of like, just calling the shots and stuff and getting it done, but the producer is the underlaying everything. So
yeah, and I rambled a bit on that one, but I think even then, a lot of times when people from the outside, they don't understand what a producer does, because it isn't as defined as, say, like the DP is going to be in charge of how it looks, the director's in charge of pretty much everything. The producer just gets everything behind the scenes done so that you can have a film or any project that you're working on. Permits, getting the cast there on time, making sure the call sheets come out, working with every single department there in a non-creative way. But again, I think organization can be creative, and the best definitely understand that.
Right. So then you like the creative aspect of filmmaking more.
Yeah. So I like, even when I'm just directing or just doing something in the creative end, I still kind of like understanding what it is to be a producer and having a close collaboration with them too, because again, you just can't get anything done if it's chaotic.
Right. That definitely takes a lot of people to get it done.
Yeah. exactly. And everyone has to know their own assigned roles there too, and just
Mhm.
support each other without necessarily butting against each other there.
Right. So do you mind telling us some of the films or series that you've worked on?
Sure. So I've been in LA about 15 years or so since I moved out from Philly and South Jersey. And on again, off again, I've been working with Caesar Milan in all of his different shows, from Dog Whisperer through the new one that just premiered on Nat Geo Wild. So that was great. Just I never thought that'd become like one of the go-to like animal people in LA. But that's brought me into shows like Animal ER and his great independent documentary series about giving service dogs to veterans. And that's one avenue of it, is just this reality world, like all these dog shows, and then working with first responders as well tends to be a recent trend. For movies, it's a lot of independently financed movies that I've been doing. But I think it's very exciting to work in that indie realm for sure.
What would you say is the biggest challenge in the filmmaking process? And then also you can tell us what your favorite part of filmmaking would be.
I think undeniably my favorite part has got to be collaboration. And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, is leaning into that collaboration, knowing that you don't have the best answer. And if sometimes you might, but still being willing to throw that away and being open to someone else when they have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's even this last film that I just did, Driftwood, I made that very creatively. I made that very collaboratively with everybody there in the cast and crew, and told them the same thing: throw any idea out. I can't promise you can make it on page or on the screen, but I'm still going to listen to it. And just hearing that idea might inform my own decision down the line, whether or not their idea made it on screen. But just willing to know, like, you don't know everything. You're lucky if you know anything. Just listen to people around you there.
Mm-hmm. Definitely have to take in like all different opinions and viewpoints and how to make the perfect film, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's funny you say that. I think understanding you can never make a perfect film is also key. It becomes what it needs to become, and that's its own version of perfect, I guess.
Mhm.
But that idea of the perfectionist, I think, is a bit of a myth. And just know
Yeah.
what's right. It's not perfect as it lives in your head going into it. I think that's the key.
Mm-hmm. So, do you mind telling us how you got started in your career? What were the earliest films you've worked on, or the experiences you've had that have led up to where you are today?
Looking back, I'm trying to think. I was always juggling a lot of projects, even at LaSalle, producing a feature film outside of LaSalle, just a local filmmaker there in South Jersey. So came on a second AD and then ended up editing and shooting with him. Ended up as like producer, I think second AE, learned how to edit 16 millimeter on an old Steenbeck flatbed. So having that experience was incredible. And just like, it's running with weights on, it teaches you so much down the line, so that by the time the digital revolution, if you want to call it that, came around, just
Mhm.
knowing the value of a frame, I think it was so far. That was definitely very informative, very important for me early on. And then out of LaSalle, immediately I started just working a lot of commercials throughout Philly, running film up to New York, just kind of any job I could get in. I was an extra in this movie Invincible with Mark Wahlberg back in the day about the Eagles. So it's just taking any job, because you might meet somebody great there, or you might learn something invaluable there. Just being open to whatever experience comes along.
Right. So, is there any director that you take inspiration from, or you make your films similar to?
I wouldn't say make similar to, because I'm always just trying to still figuring it out, as we all are.
Right.
I think the best filmmakers at the top of their game are still reinventing themselves. One that comes to mind is Paul Thomas Anderson. He's one of my favorites. Just very unique in his own voice, but also very rooted in tradition, which I love, of understanding classic cinema and just how to adapt that so it feels like a very real, visceral moment that you're experiencing with the characters there. He's someone I always admire and aspire to be. Not
Mhm.
aspire to be, but just live up to something, a fraction of what he's been able to make there.
Right.
I think seeing Magnolia in the theaters actually was one of the pivotal moments for me, that I knew that's what I wanted to do. Is
Mhm.
I wanted to go out and make something as bold and weird and brazen as Magnolia was.
Right. And so you've always had a love for film. When was the very beginning of this love for film? When did that happen?
I mean, I was always obsessed with movies growing up. I saw Pinocchio in theaters for a reissue at a very young age. And I think at that point on, I was just blown away by the magnitude of what this
Mhm.
story could be. I think ever since Pinocchio, probably through Magnolia, I was just slowly crafting my career of what I wanted to do.
That's great. Those are great movies too.
Good bookmarks there. Good bookends.
Yes. Um, I forgot what I was gonna say. I'm thinking about Pinocchio now. So you're also a photographer. What kind of photos do you take, and where has your work been featured?
So in between longer jobs, if I'm on a TV show or a feature or whatever, I'm usually taking photos. So I'll supplement that income oftentimes by shooting headshots, events. Shot for a couple of museums here in LA as well as down in Mexico. And yeah, if I'm not shooting people, I'm normally just like wandering around the back streets of LA on my days off, just taking street scenes, just trying, experimenting, finding. It's kind of a study in composition in a way. So I used to actually early on when I really got into photography, would just drive around and walk around all the time with the camera. So every single red light, I would just challenge myself to try to find some interesting frame, just to try to train my eye, because even a normal boring kind of stop sign, there might be something of interest there. So just kind of
Right.
like a challenge, trying to find that one little thing of interest.
Yeah, that's true. There's creativity and things that are beautiful everywhere. So it's good to just start taking pictures.
Yeah, and it's the easiest thing you can do as a I don't want to say wannabe filmmaker, but aspiring filmmaker, I think is obviously writing is free, but then just walking around and understanding a camera, knowing what the feel is like in your hand and just always
Mhm.
training that eye. So
Yeah,
some I think old school filmmakers and photographers will say that they're two very different muscles of stills versus the moving image, but to me they communicate with each other and they help me by shooting one, I'm better at the other.
right. So do you have any upcoming projects or any goals for the future?
So right now I'm developing a couple short films, a couple narrative short films with some friends of mine. And then I'm also doing something very near and dear to my heart. We're developing, my friend Kevin and I have worked with, and he's acted in countless films of mine. I've known him since my East Coast days. We're developing a short documentary about the homeless crisis in LA and how it affects the children out here. And there's all these tutorships that go out and actually educate these kids on the streets of LA. So we're making a documentary about that amazing experience and just trying to through education get some of these kids hopefully into a better life.
Right.
So we just got approved for fiscal sponsorship for that. So that's definitely one of the main tracks that I'm on right now. For long-term goals or aspirations, just staying busy. I'm always developing a few projects at a time, a couple features, either as DP, just producer, or as director. Sometimes all three, as in the case with Driftwood.
Right. That's also really amazing to take on all of those roles at once. I'm sure it's very busy.
Yeah, I always joke like there's the myth of Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill every single day and it rolls back and he's got to roll it back up again. I always
Yeah.
think that being a filmmaker is kind of like doing that with like 38 boulders in one day, and if you get them all up the hill an inch, you're okay.
Yeah, for sure. Every little bit makes a difference in the film.
Yeah,
LaSalle's communication department is really good at providing and teaching like skills needed in various communication fields. What skill do you think is the most important or useful in the field you are in now?
I mean, there were so many amazing professors and classes I had on the technical end that, of course, you can't overlook. And that's when you're coming up and, when I went into LaSalle, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to get in the camera and directing and everything else. And that's what you're hungriest for, I think, immediately is just learning all the technical stuff, how the camera works and how to use it and everything. But I think you're least excited sometimes as a student for the core classes like interpersonal, because you feel like you want to get into the nitty gritty of learning the cameras and everything else, at least for my end. But I look back on it as such a valuable experience because it's not, I mean, it's an incredibly technical field, but what really matters is your connection with people. So I feel like looking back, it's the classes that you kind of glance over the most that is just about how you relate to one another and how to approach somebody in a conversation or a conflict and everything else that, you know, I think that really is the core for a reason. It matters the most in hindsight there.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any advice for students or future students who may want to work in the film industry?
I think I'll pose that like what I'd say to a younger me. um, I would say these days, especially even more so now, everybody has the tools. I mean, you've got Steve Soderbergh, you got top directors making movies on iPhones. It's not that simple, but the tools are all there. You got a 5D or a Blackmagic or an iPhone or anything you want. You can make a movie, even if it's in your backyard. But I think that is kind of the next wave of filmmaking that we're seeing. Uh, Filmmakers like the movie Krisha, or what Jim Cummings has been doing with Thunder Road and his others, the Wolf of Snow Hollow. It is the backyard filmmaking wave that we're seeing, where people can just go out, make a thing, and actually get some distribution with the right talent behind it. I think now what matters as much as the craft is just learning the business.
Mhm.
That's something that I wish I might have done earlier, back in the day. Paid a little bit more attention to, instead of just honing the crafts, because it really does matter. It's just separating yourself from all the noise and all the I don't know, everyone's making a movie, so it's just that's the easy part. It's the
Right.
distribution, it's finishing a thing. That's what really matters, I think.
Mhm. That's some great advice. I'll definitely take that.
Yeah.
Definitely take that into consideration going forward. While you were at LaSalle, what were any activities that you were involved in?
I was pretty busy there. I didn't sound it, but I did so brother Jerry Molyneux, he was the head of the chair of the communication department at the time, and he was very much a mentor to me. So he taught the film theory there, and I worked very closely with him my 4 years at LaSalle. And through him and with him, actually, I had a film society that he always said I should call the Underground Film Society, because almost no one ever showed up. But we'd have if like 5 people showed up on a bad night, if 30 people showed up on a good night, it was great just to show random, amazing, weird, obscure films and just discuss the art behind it. So I did Film Society there. I was also general manager at the radio station my senior year, and was a DJ before that and everything else. And they've
Yeah.
certainly expanded beyond my days there. So I'm glad they're doing better than just the AM band.
Well, that's really cool. Yeah, there's a lot of things to do on campus now, and probably when you were there too, but
Yeah, I was
yeah.
busy with both of those, and then just it was always the extracurricular stuff outside.
Mhm.
Again, producing a couple features while I was there. They're just outside of LaSalle as well.
Well, thank you so much, Neil, for taking the time to share your experience with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you. So thanks for having me, Hannah.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of One on One with LaSalle TV. I'm Hannah Balkowski, and we'll see you next time.